All right, it's Wednesday here in the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know the deal. Everything you need Pitt sports related is right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, message boards where you can talk with other Pitt fans and all the news and content and coverage of Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, and anything else going on in the world of Pitt sports. You know what I always ask you to do with our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button. It's right down there. Turn on your notifications. That'll help you out. You subscribe, and that'll help me out. You turn on your notifications. It'll help you out, because then you'll get an alert whenever we post new videos right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And also you get an alert when we go live, like we're going to do tonight for the weekly Panther-Lair show, 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You might forget about it. By the time I get to 8:30 at night, I've forgotten a lot of things, but you can definitely, you can help yourself and not miss it when you get an alert sent to your phone when you turn on, or on your laptop, or wherever, you get a YouTube alert sent if you turn on notifications. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. A bunch of different things to go over today. Stuff from football training camp, or spring camp as it were. A couple of things I want to talk about there. And basketball news. And I think we'll start with that, because Pitt had another player going to the transfer portal yesterday. Nate Santos entered the portal. He's the second Pitt player to enter the transfer portal this offseason. The first one, of course, being John Hughley, who I suppose in spirit entered the transfer portal back in like January when he left the team, but officially did it last month. Now Nate Santos yesterday entered the portal, and he was the second one for Pitt. And I wrote in the 321 column last week, I wrote, our 321 column we do on Panther-Lair.com every Friday. 3 things we know, 2 questions we have, 1 prediction. And I wrote in the prediction that Pitt probably wasn't going to lose anybody else to the transfer portal. The distinct impression I was getting was that John Hughley might be the only player to go, but the one sort of TBD situation was Nate Santos, that everyone I talked to said they weren't entirely sure what Santos was going to do. He hadn't gone into the portal yet, but he might. It was still kind of up in the air, but everyone else seems pretty locked in. And, largely when we say everyone else, the one we're really talking about is Dior Johnson, right? I mean, he would be the only question mark. I would think you would feel relatively safe in assuming that the Diaz-Graham twins, that Federico, that Will Jeffress, were all coming back, that Blake Hinson was set to return. It was just a question of Dior Johnson and how he would fit, or what he would decide to do. And every indication I had is that he had decided he's going to stay after spending a year redshirting at Pitt. He would be back and not enter the transfer portal. But the one question mark was Nate Santos, and understandably so. On a team with a rather short bench, Santos really never found a role this past season. And what I suggested in the column last week, and what I've said a few times, is that, I could see Santos waiting to see what Pitt did in the transfer portal. If he was trying to get a handle on how he would fit into the rotation next year, he might be keeping an eye on who they were bringing in as a transfer, because, transfers could potentially take up his spot, right? Take up the place, the minutes or the position that would go to him. Now, they obviously haven't landed anyone from the transfer portal yet. They can't even bring in guys for visits until tomorrow. I think tomorrow is the first day that it's a recruiting contact period again, so you can have in-home visits and campus visits. But I think, Santos looked at the situation and said he probably could find a better opportunity somewhere else. And he's probably right. Like I said, in a short bench this past season, he really didn't get a whole lot of run, and was pretty clearly passed over. Certainly, if you look at him, he's either a small forward or a power forward. Even if he came to Pitt potentially as a 2 or a 3, he seemed to be playing mostly this past season as a 3 and a 4. And at the 3, you had all those guards who were going to take those minutes there. And at the 4, he got passed over by, Jorge Diaz-Graham by the end of the year was the top reserve at the power forward position. When they needed to take Blake Hinson out, it was Jorge who got those minutes. And it's unfortunate with Santos, because I thought he showed some things this year. Limited minutes, limited opportunities, but I thought he showed some things that I wasn't sure that he had. And it's funny because he came in as a guy with a big reputation as a shooter. He was a really good three-point shooter. He was going to knock down a lot of shots, and that's what everybody expected him to be able to do. And instead, what we saw out of him this year was a guy who could play fairly well on defense, rebounded okay, and was kind of physical. It had a certain toughness to his game, and it was more physical than I really ever expected him to be. I thought he'd just be a guy who hung out on the perimeter and took threes and made threes. Well, he wasn't that guy. He took some threes. He didn't really make them, but he was physical. He was tougher than I expected him to be, and I was kind of excited about the possibility of what kind of role he might be able to carve out. And we've all gone back and forth about projecting what this lineup will look like next season and how this guy will fit or that guy will fit and where Blake Hinson's going to play. I still don't see him moving to the 3. I mean, it's just me. I could be completely wrong about that, but I still see Hinson staying at the power forward position because, to me, if you move Hinson to the 3, you take away all the matchup advantages that he's got, and you put him in situations where the matchups distinctly don't favor him, in my view. What I keep saying about Blake Hinson, not to get too far on a sidetrack here, what I keep saying about Blake Hinson is if you imagine him playing the 3 against Pitt, he's guarding Nike Sabandi. How's that going to go? Or he's trying to drive on Nike Sabandi or Jamarius Burton. Putting him at the 4, where he's going to face off, against guys that I think he'll have a better matchup against, and he'll be able to get his shot against. I think it's a far better fit. I mean, that's a digression. We could have a long conversation about that. And I know there's a lot of people who are convinced that Hinson can and potentially even will move to the 3, opening up room for Jorge Diaz-Graham and another transfer to come in, or Will Jeffress or something like that. We'll see how it all pans out. But I think between Hinson, Jorge, and Will Jeffress, you've got 3 guys. Who could play the 4, with Jeffress potentially playing the 3, in addition to the guards who are going to get minutes at the 3 as well. And if you're Nate Santos, you're looking at it and saying, I'm just not sure I'm going to get time here. I'm just not sure I'm going to get on the court. I'm not sure I'm going to get minutes. And I want to go somewhere where I can play. It's understandable. It's understandable. I have to imagine, from everything I've heard, he's not leaving on bad terms or anything like that. It seems like he was very much a part of the team and very engaged with the team, but guy wants to play, and I don't think you can fault him for that. But I think that should be the last one. That should be the extent of the attrition. John Hughley and Nate Santos should be it. I would be shocked if anyone else joins them in the transfer portal, but that should be just about it. And now I believe they've got 4 scholarship spots left to fill. So more opportunities in the transfer portal, late blooming high school players, a junior college, whatever it is you might find out there. And we've talked so many times about they should play with 13. They should have 13 scholarship guys. I mean, they're not going to use 13 guys. You'd like to have the depth in case someone gets hurt or in trouble or something like that, but they're not going to play with 13 scholarship guys. So really, you're looking at these key 2 or 3 transfer additions as the guys who are really going to have an impact this season and be important for what the team does in this coming season. But whatever they're doing next season, whatever they do, Nate Santos won't be part of it. So good luck to Nate. Hopefully he finds a good home and a good opportunity. We'll see him. We'll keep an eye on him. Kind of keep an eye on a lot of the guys who transfer out of Pitt, and Nate Santos will be another one. Certainly John Hughley would be one that we would be keeping an eye on, particularly with him looking at schools like Georgia Tech and West Virginia who show up on the schedule. Interesting matchups there. We'll definitely be watching that and seeing what happens. Back in the South Side, Pitt was practicing again yesterday. It was practice number 11, I believe. They have number 12 tomorrow. Then they're off this weekend. And then next week, Tuesday, Thursday, spring game. That's it, 13, 14, 15. And that'll wrap it up. The end is coming soon. The end is coming fast. And it's sort of, on one hand, it feels like it's been spring camp for a few weeks, for a little while now, but it doesn't necessarily feel like we're approaching the final week. Regardless, we'll have plenty of things to observe and talk about. But there was something yesterday. Narduzzi did something that I don't know if he intended to do it, if he meant to do it, if it was an accident or it was just sort of speaking his mind and saying what he thinks. But he had a quote, and you probably saw I highlighted it, and I think some other guys highlighted it. Other guys who cover the team have highlighted it. Narduzzi was asked yesterday. Here was a question. 4 weeks in to spring camp, how would you evaluate what you've seen from your quarterbacks? I'm going to read his direct quote here. Quote, "We've got Phil stepping up here today. He's been outstanding like we thought. He got maybe 25 snaps the last 2 scrimmages. We've seen a lot of good things from practice that, just to keep him safe and find out what we've got." Here's the key. I mean, that's Narduzzi saying that they haven't used Phil Dracovic all that much in scrimmages because they like what they've seen in practice. Here's the key quote. Quote, "I think right now Christian and my man Nate, they're in a battle right now, and Ty's done some really nice things. So they're in a battle for that number 2 spot, and we'll keep evaluating, and it will be something that goes into the summer." And as soon as he said that, bing, my radar went off. I think all the other guys standing in that interview huddle, their radars went off. And probably when you read that quote or, watched the video, your radar probably went off too. Because those guys he just listed, Christian, that'd be Christian Bear, Nate Yarnell, and Ty Diefenbach, those would be the other 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. And he said, quote, they're in a battle for that number 2 spot. The implication being the number 1 spot is locked up. Now, Pat Narduzzi likely had no intention of announcing a starting quarterback or a number 1 quarterback anytime prior to mid-August, and he didn't really say it there. But I pretty clearly did say it there. It's almost like you could imagine him coming out on Thursday and if somebody asked, "So Pat, just to clarify, were you announcing that you have a starting quarterback?" And he could say something like, "Well, I thought I gave that speech on Tuesday. I gave my retirement speech, like Jim Boeheim, I gave my retirement speech on Tuesday. I gave my QB1 speech on Tuesday." I mean, you read into it however you want, and I would not be shocked if tomorrow Pat Narduzzi comes out and talks after practice and says, "You guys read way too much into that. We've got an open competition. Everybody's battling for that starting job, and this and that." I would not be shocked by that in the least. But what was said, and it follows the line of everything we've seen this spring, everything we've heard this spring, and everything we expected this spring. I think we've all known since Phil Dracovic was recruited, since Phil Dracovic committed, and since he's been on campus, that he was expected to be the number 1 quarterback, the starting quarterback this season. When we've talked about how Pitt's going to improve this year and how the offense needs to improve and where they need to improve over what, the quarterback play from Keaton Slovis, we've talked about it almost exclusively in terms of Phil Dracovic. And Narduzzi seemed to indicate that as well. Now, I do believe, and I mean, this is something that you decide for yourself. You either believe it or you don't. I do believe that if Christian Bear or Nate Yarnell or Ty Diefenbach was outplaying Phil Dracovic or ran the offense better than Phil Dracovic or just was simply better than Phil Dracovic, that guy would be playing. That guy would be the top quarterback, and Dracovic would be battling with my man Nate, as Narduzzi called him, and Ty Diefenbach for the number 2 job. I believe they will go with the best quarterback. I will believe they will go with the quarterback who moves the offense the best and the quarterback who gives them the best chance to score points and win games. I do believe that. Well, what about Keaton Slovis last year? They never pulled him. Maybe he was still the best option. I don't know. I mean, you look at the games they lost. Nick Patty wasn't available for the Georgia Tech game. I forget if he even traveled for the Louisville game, but if he did, he was still hurt, presumably, or maybe he was healthy by the Louisville game. But I think the coaches, based on practice, based on film room, based on, oodles of information that you and I don't have just by virtue of being around every day at practice and being in the film room every day and breaking down all the practice film and all those different things, still said Slovis was the best option. For better or worse, and I don't think the Sun Bowl entirely changes that. I don't think the Sun Bowl entirely disproves that or says, see, clearly the coaches were wrong. I think Nick Patty played a hell of a game in the Sun Bowl. There's no question about it. He was great. I think they still felt like Slovis was the best option. I've gone over this a million times. Pat Narduzzi has benched quarterbacks. It doesn't feel like he ever has, because for 4 years in a row he had Kenny Pickett as the starting quarterback, and he wasn't benching Kenny Pickett because Pickett was the best option. But he has benched quarterbacks in the past, particularly in his early years, and I don't think he would hesitate. He might hesitate a little bit, but I think he would do it again if he felt like that was the best move. All this is to say that I don't believe, Dracovic was just handed QB1 duties and that's it. I think he's earned it, and I think part of Narduzzi's quote there was telling, and it's in line with what we heard after the last scrimmage, not this past Saturday scrimmage, but the week before, when we heard that Dracovic really didn't do much in the scrimmage, played limited, maybe played like 3 series or something like that, because what they're seeing in practice, sort of day to day, is convincing them that he's the guy. And so, they feel comfortable with where he is. And so they want to get more work in the scrimmage for Vare and Yarnell and Diefenbach. So, I think we all assumed that this would be the case, but it's pretty fairly confirmed, even if Narduzzi, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he bends over backward to sort of disprove it or deny it and not actually name a starter until August. But kind of let the cat out of the bag on that one yesterday. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something we've been talking about on Panther-Lair.com the last week or so, and really since camp started in different forms and different ways, but we really amped up the conversation last week when we talked to Andre Powell, the special teams coordinator, about the punting situation. Because look, and I know, the punting wasn't good last year. The punting was a mess. They had a lot of issues in the punting. It was very inconsistent, and it cost them on a number of occasions last season. And so it was interesting to me. Punting is one of the few things we actually see in practice. I'm not kidding. The media watches about 5 periods of practice, and one of those periods is punt drills. And it's one of the more interesting drills that we actually get to see. Because there are players from offense and defense on the field at the same time, and a football moves. And so that is very rare to actually witness. But as we've watched the punts, we've only seen 2 guys actually punt the ball, and it's Caleb Junko and Jeff Yerk, with Yerk being a transfer from Elon and Junko punting like 12 times last year. It hasn't been Sam Vanderhaar, the scholarship kicker they brought in last year as a freshman, and it hasn't been Cam Guest, the guy they preferred walk-on who came in from Bell Vernon a couple years ago. It's been Junko and Yerk. And I thought that's interesting. I said it to somebody like a week ago. I was like, man, I have not seen Vanderhaar punt the ball one time. And then we talked to Andre Powell, and he, we're talking about this or that about the punters, and he says, yeah, we've got two punters at the top right now. We've got our top 2 punters, and we feel pretty good about them. So, well, who's your top 2 punters? It doesn't seem like the guy. I said this to him. I was like, look, this is one of the only things we actually get to watch in practice, and from what we can see from the sideline, the guys who did most of the punting last year aren't getting any snaps at all. Is it the other 2 guys? He said, yeah, it's the other. It's Junko and Yerk. And Pat Narduzzi kind of said that yesterday as well. After he talked about the quarterbacks, he said he wanted to talk about the punting. And he said he only mentioned 2 guys. Again, Caleb Junko and Jeff Yerk. He said Junko's doing a nice job. Jeff's doing a nice job as well. There's a battle going on there. This is pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting to have a scholarship punter who you brought in as a freshman last year, and he doesn't really seem to be in the mix. Now, it's not the worst. If they intend to redshirt him and, come back to him, next year as a redshirt sophomore, see if he's comfortable now or if he's kind of mastered the game, okay, but it's a curious situation. Now, for Junko and Yerk, those guys are booming the ball. They're putting it in the ceiling a lot. They have big legs, bigger legs than certainly I think than we've seen from Vanderhaar. Cam Guest seems to punt okay, but they can boom it. They can boom it. Junko had the 85-yard punt or whatever it was in the Sun Bowl. They can kick it real far. They have to master some of the finer details, but if those are the 2 guys at the top, they're not bad punters. They're not bad punters. And you know who else isn't bad? Speaking of special teams, Ben Sauls. I mean, Ben Saul's. I wrote an article about Ben Saul's a couple weeks ago on Panther-Lair.com, and hopefully you got a chance to check it. It was about check it out. It was about how Saul's has really taken a. Yeah, I mean, he talked a lot about process oriented as opposed to outcome oriented, and how when he was struggling at the beginning of the season last year. I think he only made 5 of his first 8 field goal attempts. He missed 2, I think, against Tennessee, a game that ultimately went to overtime. So those loom large. And he was getting really down on himself and was getting, starting to feel pretty bad and losing some of his confidence. And he really just focused on the process and went back to just step by step of what you're supposed to do on a kick, and really kind of took the approach of like, okay, if I follow this process and I do this exactly the way I like to do it, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, it's going to be good. It's going to go down the middle. It's going to make the kick. And you think he might be a bit of a hyperbole there, but the reality is after he started 5 of 8, he made 15 of 16. And the only one he missed was a 54-yard kick at Virginia that went off the upright, had the distance, and was just a few inches. I think it was to the left. I forget exactly if it was the left or the right, but it went off the upright. I mean, it was not a kick that was too short, and it wasn't really that far off the mark. Then, of course, he makes 5 field goals on 5 attempts in the Sun Bowl. I mean, Ben Sauls went from being, if you want to say, if not a liability, he went from being a real question mark to, I mean, just the absolute model of consistency and reliability by the end of the season. I mean, you talk about areas where they're strong or they're weak. I mean, that's a strength coming in. They have, a guy who should be considered one of the premier kickers in the ACC heading into the 2023 season. So that's a good thing. I mean, I think you look at kicking, you look at punting, you look at long snapping, you look at all those special teams units, and you just want to not have to worry about them. It's great when they're an asset, like Sauls was in the Sun Bowl, that, when they took the ball back on that final drive, they knew if they could just get to a certain spot, they'd have a great chance to win because Sauls could make that field goal. But even you just don't want to have to worry about it. You want to be able to rely on, okay, if offensive drive dies, we can punt it and get good field position out of it. Okay, offensive drive stalls in the other team's territory inside the 30, that's okay. We're going to get at least 3 points out of it because we have this field goal kicker who's pretty much money. You don't want to have to worry about those things. And I think probably for Pat Narduzzi, that was a real concern last year, particularly with the punting situation, because he probably felt like he had to worry about it a lot. And every moment you have to worry about special teams, when those guys aren't just sort of reliable and almost automatic in their duties, that takes away time spent worrying about and figuring out and refining the offense and defense where you're really going to win and lose the game. And so right now, I mean, I think the punting situation is one they still have to solve. But the place kicking situation with Ben Sauls, I mean, that should be, if not considered automatic, it's close enough that it shouldn't be a source of consternation or concern for the coaching staff, which is a pretty good place to be. All right. Just wanted to cover a few of those topics today. Nate Santos, the QB1 situation, and then the kickers. Bring you up to speed on all those topics. That's what we do here on the Morning Pit. Just kind of run down everything going on in the world of Pitt sports to get you started on the day. You get your morning shower, you get your morning shave, and you get your morning pit. Of course, then you want to tune in or head over to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting, Panther-Lair.com. We got a lot of coverage from spring camp there. We got a lot of coverage from on the recruiting front, covering basketball stuff. We got a lot going on. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So go over and check that out. And of course, while you're here, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Click the like button, click the subscribe button. We appreciate both of those things very much. Don't forget, we'll be live tonight at 8:30 p.m. for the Panther-Lair Show, talking about all these topics and taking your comments and questions. So you want to be sure to tune in at 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we'll talk to you for the live show tonight. In between now and then, I hope you have a great Wednesday. The weather is supposed to be beautiful, save for maybe a little bit of thunderstorms in the morning. Hopefully that passes. We get nice heat and sunshine, and lead you right into the Panther-Lair Show tonight. So we'll talk to you then, and we will see you after that tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.